Sometimes the biggest AAA games are remembered most for the big, massive risks they take. So today we're going to talk about 10 games, 10 specific examples of the riskiest changes AAA games have ever made. Starting off with number 10, let's talk Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. This is definitely one of the weirder ones on this list because who would have thought that 1, Ubisoft would develop a Mario game, and 2, in that Ubisoft game, Mario would be teaming up with those stupid annoying Rabbids that everybody hates. You know, basically like the minions of video games. And to make it even more weird, it's a tactical XCOM style game where Mario basically has a gun, and Nintendo signed off on all this. Now when I say all this out loud, it sounds horrible, but honestly it was actually really good and took everybody by surprise. Ubisoft also did a really good job of capturing the Mario vibe. If we can learn anything from this game, it's that Mario kind of works in any scenario he's tossed into, whether he's playing golf or soccer, or he's an RPG, or he's wielding a gun. He's literally a jack of all gaming trades. It must have done really well too, because we're getting a sequel that actually looks awesome and surprisingly great visually as well. This is just something we never expected, and it's a mashup that could have been a completely tone-deaf disaster, and it turned out to be great. Next, over at number 9, we have Metroid Prime. There's a reason people speak so fondly of this game, and when you really sit down to think about it, it was definitely a risky move to even make this game. Metroid and Castlevania really obviously paved the way for Metroidvania-style games. It's also important to note that both series were 2D side-scrollers, so when Retro Games decided to make a 3D first-person shooter Metroid, you can see why your average player might be a little hesitant about it. First-person Metroid, gross. But really though, they nailed it. It encapsulated everything that Nintendo R&D did with the previous 3 games and Fusion that launched the same day as Prime. It nailed the atmosphere of being alone in space, stuck with all these aliens that want to kill you. The music is still awesome. The backtracking after getting new abilities and even just shifting from 2D to 3D in the game felt natural. Whether it's the level design or how Samus's abilities like Morph Ball or the Morph Beam worked, it's literally a 3D Metroid game and it worked perfectly. It feels like a miracle. It also didn't feel like a first-person shooter in the typical sense, with Nintendo actually referring to it as a first-person adventure, which we think sums it up pretty perfectly. Retro really nailed Prime, and we're really excited that they're coming back for Metroid Prime 4. Next, over at number 8, let's talk Hitman 3. Specifically Hitman 3 because it wrapped up the World of Assassination trilogy that IO Interactive attempted. We've gotten Hitman games consistently for many years, but with the World of Assassination thing, IO Interactive really tried to shake things up, and at first, hardcore Hitman fans like myself were not into it. Breaking up the game into episodic levels that were just going to be distributed or purchased piecemeal didn't really seem to work. But then Hitman 2 came around, the publishing strategy changed a little bit, and then 3 released and kind of combined everything. It figured out exactly how to release these games, how to keep content, how to keep you playing, how to really emphasize replayability, and it all finally just clicked. So now at the end of it, if you go into this and you have these new Hitmans, Hitman 1, 2, and 3, you get a ton of awesome content that just really works, and they're still adding new stuff to play all the time in these massive levels. IO Interactive really could have just continued to put out very traditional single-player linear style Hitman games, and a lot of people like me would have loved that, but they seemingly wanted to shake things up and try something different, and it definitely took a minute to convince skeptical fans like myself, but for a lot of people they really turned it around and just made a really cool series of Hitman games with really fun levels and awesome kills and tons of player freedom. It could have gone way worse, and in the earlier days it really seemed like it was gonna, but thankfully they turned it around, and we think this risk paid off, and we're really excited to see what they do next. Next, over at number 7, let's talk Prey. Now, the original shooter from 2006 was pretty awesome. Not a lot of people remember it, but it was just like an awesome story-based linear adventure first-person shooter with really crazy, gory sci-fi elements that made it pretty memorable. Then for years, there was a rumored Prey 2 that took the concept even further into cool sci-fi Star Wars style space, and a lot of people, myself included, were incredibly hyped about it until it was eventually canceled. Instead, Bethesda went in another direction and got Arcane on board to make a new Prey that is a completely different style. It's a little smarter, it's a little more slow, and it's a little bit more of a high concept thing. And that was a big risk because it could have ended up not being great and had everybody saying, why didn't we just get another Tommy-style original Prey game? Or even worse, why didn't they just make that original Prey 2 that they canceled? What the hell? But thankfully, Prey released, and it turned out to be pretty awesome and really unique. Even if you're not really into this style of gameplay, you got to admit this is a very cool, unique spin on kind of the arcane Dishonored formula with a nice mashup of sci-fi, horror, and some interesting themes. The story had some twists and turns, the gameplay was pretty intense, it did some creative things, and we're glad it exists. There's a very realistic timeline where this game never happened, and we're glad that it didn't go that way. Next, over at number 6, let's get a little controversial. The Final Fantasy VII Remake. First of all, the announcement was weird. On one hand, you have people who were not hyped on it, whether it was returning players or players that get to experience it for the first time. Then on the other hand, you can't help but think, well, Final Fantasy VII is damn near perfect as is, so do we really need a remake? Then you find out that the remake is being split into parts. Not episodic necessarily, but long-ass games still split apart. The first game only covers Midgard, leaving the open world, the chocobos, and all that jazz for the later game for a whole separate game or games. We still don't really even know what's going on. But with this first game, they really nailed it. Final Fantasy VII Remake is actually really, really good, at least for most fans, and is for the most part pretty faithful for the OG game. There's gonna be certain things that bother some people, but overall, it was a pretty fun game. Now, without spoiling things, mostly towards the end, things start to get a little weird and change things up, and that's a little bit more worth a longer conversation, but still, we mostly like the changes. They're definitely unexpected, but we're curious to see what comes next and whether or not they'll stick the landing. So while we think this is a risk that so far has mostly paid off because we liked the first remake game, this one's kind of like a to be continued, and maybe we'll revisit this list in a couple of years. Now over at number 5, let's talk Alien Isolation. Now for this one, we wanted to pick something you wouldn't expect, a little less run-of-the-mill, you know? Before Isolation, people played Alien games to shoot xenomorphs. You know, there have been tons of games giving you a cool gun or a flamethrower and let you wreak havoc on a spaceship or on an alien planet against all these guys. Sometimes you get to even play as them. But where Aliens inspired so many games, Alien, the original movie, was a tougher nut to crack, you know, a trickier video game puzzle. But after the disaster that was Colonial Marines, the license holders of the Alien franchise tried a completely different and bolder, gutsier direction, embracing the horror aspect of the original Alien, making you much more helpless and the singular alien that much more scary and dangerous and threatening. It was a big move to shift from the mindless alien killing cool sci-fi action and going full sci-fi horror, but it paid off. It was awesome and people loved it. Next, over at number 4, let's talk HalfLife Alyx, because after more than a decade, we finally got a new Half-Life game, only this time it's VR, meaning only a small chunk of the Half-Life audience can actually play it. That's an aggressive bet on VR right there. You know, Valve has believed in VR for years, invested heavily into it, but a full Half-Life game in VR? That was unexpected and not really what anyone could have seen coming. Did the risk pay off? Well, it is technically one of the best reviewed games on VR headsets, but we don't know necessarily that it was like the killer app to kick VR into the stratosphere. Even still, at risk of alienating so many fans, or just being an awkward flop or a cash-in on the name, HalfLife Alyx ended up being one of the best VR games, but also just a really damn good Half-Life game straight up. It does not feel like a cheap prequel or a little side adventure or like a corny, half-assed VR game where all of the elements aren't really thought out. No, this thing really works as a playable game, and also it slots right into the Half-Life mythos perfectly, seamlessly. You know, we were worried for a second. Some of us thought that Valve didn't have it in them anymore, and sure enough, Half-Life Alyx, while the VR thing was a big risk, we got a damn good game. Next, over at number 3, let's talk Resident Evil. We got 2 to mention. First, we'll start off with Resident Evil 4. The switch to the third-person over-the-shoulder camera angle and just kind of really changing up the vibe, tone, and atmosphere was a massive risk. But thankfully, with the game keeping one foot in the survival horror door and one foot in the action door and making things even zanier, it really seemed to work for people, and it became one of the best-selling Resident Evil games ever. Yada, yada, yada. You probably know the history by now, but still, that is something worth admiring just because so many people were so hooked on those classic style Resident Evil games, myself included. If you ask some people, this is the shift where Resident Evil started to just go too crazy or too action heavy, but still, 4 for most people Evil was a really satisfying game. And they could have really just kept churning out Resident Evil games in that traditional style, but they shook it up drastically and it worked. Now, on the other hand, in terms of shaking things up, they did it again with Resident Evil 7, with a return to more slow, deliberate, tense survival horror atmosphere and gameplay, and shifting it into first-person view. That is incredibly divisive, and still some people really wish we could just play as Jill Valentine and see her on screen. But in terms of reviews and sales numbers, Resident Evil 7 was a hit, and people really liked it. A Resident Evil game, from a Japanese developer jumping into first person, that could have been a disaster, but thankfully it just managed to work. Now down to number 2, let's talk Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. This was the massively hyped follow-up to the smash hit Metal Gear Solid. This time around, years had passed, technology and graphics have exploded. This was going to be one of the high points for the PS2, and it looked like a graphically mind-blowing adventure, with Solid Snake yet again saving the world and doing cool stuff. It was a really exciting time for Metal Gear fans. We watched the trailers endlessly, we pre-ordered, we waited forever, and then it released, and it was not quite what anyone expected. It was series director and creator Hideo Kojima pulling another one of his creative, weird, high guy tricks. This time around, our fan expectations were completely subverted. There was a full bait and switch here. You play as Solid Snake for the opening tanker mission, and then the mission goes south, it fades to black, and then seemingly there's a time jump and you're playing as this guy with big newbie energy named Raiden. And we had barely seen any of this game in any trailers or any marketing leading up to this at all. Fans over time grew to absolutely love Raiden. He's awesome, but at the time, jumping from the kick-ass, awesome, cigarette-chewing Solid Snake man to skinny, long-haired guy in a leotard Raiden, there was some whiplash for sure. Some people were really pissed. Personally, I totally believe they ended up sticking the landing, and the whole Raiden Snake switch was actually the least crazy thing about the game. And now, in 2021, almost every Metal Gear Solid fan looks back and really appreciates Raiden. Probably because they made him an awesome ninja in 4, but hey, whatever. Still, this was wild. Now down to number 1, let's talk God of War from 2018. I think the best way to describe the transition from the first era of God of War to God of War 2018 is kind of like listening to Metallica and then switching to smooth jazz. Like really sad smooth jazz. We all know what the deal is with God of War. The early entries in this series are over-the-top chaotic brawlers with a big focus on combos and a crazy amount of everything going on at once. Kratos was a very loud, angry character, and you were running around with the Greek gods and the Greek mythology. Then you get God of War 2018 and everything is toned down. Kratos is more calm, still a little angry, a new voice actor. He doesn't have his iconic Blades of Chaos for the most part. Instead, he has an axe that he can throw around like Mjolnir. The camera angle also changed to over the shoulder. It's slower. You're right up on Kratos. The story is more toned down and it's a bit more simple. There are a lot less giant bosses and less crazy set pieces. You weren't in Greek mythology anymore, but instead this game pulls from Norse mythology. There was a lot different, but at its core, it still felt like God of War, especially the combat. Even though it's completely structurally different, something about it, some of the DNA in there still just works just the way it did. It looks different, but the combo-based brawler stuff we got in the previous games is still there. It felt like the series wanted to grow up a bit and aged along with the players who have played it and the people behind the scenes who were making it. And that shift to almost making it seem like a completely different game, at least on the surface, really could have blown up in their faces, but thankfully, the fact that that DNA is still there beneath the skin made this game absolutely awesome and a risk worth taking. But those are some big risks that video games took that we wanted to talk about. Some of the bigger franchises, some of the bigger AAA games. We want to hear from you guys in the comments if you got any other examples, because there are tons that we didn't even have time to mention, from JRPGs to fighting games to anything else in between. We want to hear from you because we'd love to make a part 2 on this list. There are tons of risks out there that games still take all the time. If you enjoyed this video though, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. We would really appreciate that. And if you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting a notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.